Welcome to Nomadic Diaries, a podcast revealing secrets of life lived overseas. We use storytelling to deliver insight and information on what it takes to live, love, move, and travel across the globe. Our guests are professionals from the world of global mobility. We hope that by opening their diaries to share their wisdom, that you, our listener, can benefit and enjoy more ease and grace in your expat life abroad. Hi, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are on the globe. I would like to welcome my co-host, Sharon Fields, and our special guest today, Rebecca Eichler, who is an international human rights advocate, activist, and a lifelong adventurer. Rebecca and her husband, Paul, and their children took a wonderful journey all the way to Panama and then returned to live in the city of San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. Her humanitarian work is the subject of the internationally acclaimed feature documentary Las Abogadas, Attorneys on the Front Lines of the Migrant Crisis. Welcome, Rebecca. Thank you so much for appearing on our podcast, Nomadic Diaries.
Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, Sharon, for having me.
Could you recap just in a few sentences how you ended up in San Miguel?
Sure. So in 2015, 2016, my husband and I took a sabbatical from our jobs. We pulled our kids out of school. They were going to public schools in Virginia, in the United States. And we took a year off and drove in a 1985 Volkswagen van through the United States, through Mexico, and all the way down to Panama, where the road ends. And we turned around and we came back. And after that life-changing, transformative experience, combined with the new resident of the White House, we decided that the living in the United States really wasn't for us anymore. So we came to Mexico. We picked San Miguel because it had probably the most international schooling options for our kids. And we were really pleasantly surprised to find that it was actually the community that we were looking for. So that's how we ended up here.
Great to have you here. How did the idea come about Las Abogadas movie?
I had been an immigration lawyer in the United States for about 20 years before we moved to Mexico. And we left the DC area because I wanted to get away from, it was very traumatic working with immigrants and with migrants and refugees in the early days of the Trump administration. And it was just too heavy and we wanted to get away from that. But as it turned out, we couldn't get away from it because migration just constantly happening. And it was in 2018, in the fall of 2018, after we moved here, thousands of migrants were traversing Mexico in huge caravans. And things were changing constantly at the US border. And I realized that, there was information that I had that I could share with them to maybe help make their journey a little bit easier or make their attempts to enter the United States a little bit smoother. So I packed up the van that we drove to Panama in. I recruited some other US immigration lawyers and we drove out to meet the migrants en route to the United States. A friend of mine encouraged me to write about it on Facebook because it was, right at the forefront of the news at the time. And so I did. I really wasn't planning on writing about it, but I wrote a series of posts about my experience there. And a Facebook friend of mine who's a documentary filmmaker based in Annapolis, Maryland, read them. And she had the idea to make a movie about this work. And she called me up one day. She was judging a film festival in Sarajevo, a human rights film festival, and was, they kept asking her, what's your next project? What are you doing? And she had actually retired and she was like, I'm doing corporate stuff. And then, they encouraged her. They're like, you should do something. And so she called me up and she's like, I want to make a movie about you. And that's kind of how it happened. It was actually 4 years ago, right around now, that I got the phone call from her.
Wow. Not many people get the calling to just come and be our movie star, please. That sounds like it was the universe had a little hand in that. So can you tell us a little bit about the day or a day in the life of your helping the migrants to cross the border?
Mm-hmm. So I've done this work in different capacities in different locations on the border. It's been so for the last few years, different US administrations have erected increasingly more complicated barriers to entry. I want to note that these barriers to entry, especially for asylum seekers, are all illegal. It is illegal to put up obstacles for people to seek protection from harm. And the US has signed international treaties that obligate them to to open their doors to people seeking safety. And the barriers that they're doing are illegal. In the early days of the Trump administration, pretty much every day there was a new barrier that was being erected. I went up to Tijuana and volunteered with an organization called Al Otro Lado that is a binational legal aid organization. And what we would do is sort of know your rights presentations and then individual consultations about, assessing people's individual cases and advising them on how to think about their case, the things that they need to highlight, to explain what asylum law is and how their case fits into it, how their circumstances could fit into what the rules are in order for them to enter the United States. A year later, I also worked in Matamoros, which is on the US-Texas border. And at that point, most of the work that I did, Charlene, who is also featured in the film, she called them CTJs, come to Jesus meetings, which was telling people, I know you want to cross in the United States, but it's not going to happen. And you need to start thinking about something else. Well, of course, nobody really wants to think about something else because they have in their mind, they're getting to the US, and it's not even just in their mind. Mexico is not necessarily a safe place for many migrants, especially on the border. So my work basically consisted of delivering bad news to people all day long, day after day. And it's really hard to be the bearer of bad news.
Yeah, that must have taken its emotional toll.
Absolutely. In fact, at the beginning, right when I was going out to the caravan, a friend of mine who is a first responder, she made a point to get in touch with me and say, these are the signs of secondary trauma, and these are things that you should be aware of. And it was actually shocking to me because it was the first time in 20 years of doing this work and working with traumatized populations that anybody had ever even mentioned the word secondary trauma, and it even raised the issue that I could be affected, and that would be, very normal for that to happen. I'm happy to see now I work with law students and younger lawyers, and they're all about the secondary trauma. They know vicarious trauma. They know trauma-informed interviewing. And so that makes me really happy to see. But for me, it was definitely a learning process and a recognition of how it does affect me.
Wow.
The long-term effects that are going to be from all of that as well, especially on the children.
Absolutely.
Did you receive any counseling before or after, or was that the counseling that essentially you got?
I didn't receive any counseling really before. I mean, before I went to the caravan, she brought that up, and I looked at it a little bit after, and it's been actually several years after doing that work. I did seek out some counseling with I did a therapeutic psychedelic mushroom journey. I basically took magic mushrooms under the care of a therapist.
Yes.
Who warned me or, advised that the first thing that usually comes up is unresolved grief. And I was like, I've had a really good life. I wonder what's going to come up. And of course it was my very first asylum client and a handful of all the other clients. So subconsciously it was all there, and I had no idea. I really, I'm an optimist. I look at the bright side of things, and I had no concept that would be something that was actually buried in my psyche. And it was a relief to get get rid of it. It was, a physical process of like, I don't want this in me anymore. And it opened up the idea of, transitioning. I don't provide direct client services anymore as a result, following up on that process, on that therapy treatment, because I recognize that it's not good for me emotionally.
Yeah.
And tell me about other attorneys. How are other attorneys managing this? Is there a move? You said that all the young attorneys are aware of a secondary trauma, and they're aware of all it's like an onion, you're peeling the onion. Are they better prepared, do you think, to move into this field?
The younger attorneys, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm happy that, law schools are teaching secondary trauma. The more experienced lawyers, I don't know what they do. The other attorneys that are featured in the film have different ways of dealing with it. I know two of them were more faith-based and religious. They pray and they seek solace in that way. Charlene, who's kind of the firecracker in the film, runs on spit and fire. Her anger is what motivates her to continue to do the work. Very, very different from me, but she's, everybody deals with it in their own different ways. And I hope that lawyers who are continuing to do this recognize the need for counseling and for, protecting themselves while continuing to provide their help to the clients.
Interesting. I think we should just let this sink in for the listeners at this point, that the journeys that these migrants take and the people who support them in living into the vision of possibly getting into and overcoming the hurdles of migration to the United States it is a journey that will reverberate through generations, because trauma is actually passed on. We know now from science that it is a generational issue. And so
Absolutely.
We should all be prepared.
Absolutely. At the same time, I want to point out that people are more than their migration story. This happened to them, but so many more other things have happened to them, and they have so many other things as part of their life. And just like me, I got to be in this movie and it was great and it's been fun, but my life is so much more than what's depicted in the film.
Yes, very true. And I'm wondering, is anybody thinking about other options to the migration situation across the border? I mean, are there caravans in the reverse direction? Are there programs or anything available for these people if they're turned away at the border?
I mean, here in central Mexico, there is a shelter, a migrant shelter in Celaya called Albergue Abba House.
Yes.
And they open their doors to anybody, whether they're going north or coming south, heading back home south. So there are some services, but, any services related to providing assistance to migrants is woefully lacking. So though it would be great if there were, I don't really think I'm unaware of much. The Mexican government had programs to welcome deported Mexican citizens, but I think like in many places, the ideas are bigger than the actual financial support for them. So there's not a whole lot of, there's not really a whole lot of things. And then there's also, tons of barriers, bureaucratic barriers, including just paperwork that children born in the United States to Mexican citizens who are Mexican citizens themselves don't necessarily have the paperwork for them to go into school. So many children of deported people don't go to school because they lack the paperwork. So, there are just countless obstacles in the way on both sides. Whether there are people thinking about how to stem this, I'm sure there are bigger thinkers. I'm an idealist, and I envision a Marshall Plan for Central America, where instead of spending $2.7 billion a year incarcerating migrants who are seeking safety in the United States, let's put that money into making the situation better in their home country so that they don't have to leave. Because so many people, unlike us, who want to leave and have these support systems and privileges to go to other places, refugees are forced to leave. They don't want to leave their home. If they could, they would want to eat their food, speak their language, spend time with their family if they had a safe place to live and a secure future that they could provide for their families.
And at this point, I'd just like to interject into the conversation that we are recording this the week of the 7th of October, 2023, when Hamas has just perpetrated immense crimes on Israel. And now we're looking at another conflagration in the Middle East with possibly 2.7 million people who are essentially political hostages in some way, and how the situation is multiplying across the globe.
Across the globe.
Absolutely.
That's right.
Absolutely.
Well, Rebecca, tell us how can our listeners help? It's a small contribution that we can give, but what can our listeners do to help?
I think there's a lot of ways to help. In fact, the message of our film is that everybody can make a difference. Everybody can do something. And, from whether it's supporting financially an organization that is, on the front lines, Albergue ABBA. We're in the process of building and expanding the facilities to build a long-term shelter or a larger shelter for long-term residents. You can make a tax-deductible donation to the Latin American Relief Fund to support that. You can help with, organizations that are working right on the border. If you have money, you can donate to an organization. If you have miles, you can donate to an organization called Miles for Migrants, airline miles that get people, once they get into the United States, get them to their family, help them, buy transportation, help them buy an airfare to get to where they are. Even something as simple as just recognizing the bravery of the migrants. If you live in a community where there are foreigners, find out more about them, find out about their food, just make a connection on an individual basis. There's something that everybody can do on an individual level. And, I went to law school thinking that I was going to change the world and realizing pretty quickly that that's a pretty big job. That's beyond me, but I can change the world for one person. And I think if we each keep that in mind and just, the ripple effect of kindness, do something, even driving in San Miguel, there's people waiting, begging on the street corner, and we get caught up like, if I give him 10 pesos, that's going to, he's going to buy drugs with that, or who knows, but it's going to make a difference for that day. And I think that, we're stuck. Often people are frozen with indecision because you're thinking you're not doing the right thing, but any act of kindness is going to be the right thing no matter what the circumstances.
Very true, because there are no mistakes. You cannot, kindness can be misconstrued, but kindness does not make mistakes. It's the intention that counts. And I think sometimes coming from a very privileged country like the US, we forget how closely we're all connected. And that was one of the things I had to learn in Saudi Arabia when I had to start communicating with women who were covered and fully veiled and everything, and how to build a heart connection and how to make your heart speak louder than your presence. And actually, I came up with the term global heartedness, just being global hearted with someone else, like you're human, I'm a human. And just making that connection, I think is really critical. And it's why I have to live out of the US for the rest of my life, I think.
The more that I travel, the more I see everybody's really the same. We all want the same things. We want safety for our family. We want opportunities.
Yes.
And pretty much other than that, there's not much difference. Like how that actually looks is different, but those are the essential things that everybody wants.
Absolutely.
Well, we want kindness shown to us. When we travel to a different country, we want kindness to be shown to us. So
yes, we do.
Where can people see your movie?
Well, we've wrapped up a really successful and fun year of film festivals. We've won 13 awards all around the world. And now
Oh.
we've moved into educational distribution. We're represented by New Day, which is an educational distributor, but we're also available on Vimeo on demand. We're trying to work out how to price it right now. It's mainly geared towards educational institutions and organizations, but there are ways that we can see it with different codes on so look for Las Abogadas on Vimeo, vimeo.com. You can go to our website, lasabogadasfilm.com, and we usually post where our next screenings are going to be and how to request a screening as well.
Thank you. And we will put all of that information in the show notes for our listeners, because I know everyone will want to reach out and help. Thank you so much for being with us today. We really appreciate everything that you do for the migrants and for human. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. And we may have more questions later, but for now, we have to say we appreciate the experience and living into your vision and the possibility thinking and the way that you have had the opportunity to share this kind of thinking with migrants all over the world. And we wish the listeners will understand or learn something or have learned something so that you can become a little more global-hearted today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Doreen. Thank you, Sharon, for having me. Thank you for listening.